The Long Road by Wolfland. Even with a late start the next morning, it was barely past noon when Stephen found himself beginning his descent on the opposite side of the mountain range. Face locked in concentration, Stephen felt a trickle of sweat slide down his neck as he shifted his grip on the cliff. Cautiously shimmying along the crumbling ledge, he held his breath as he eased his hand down to a new outcropping. For someone who typically preferred under and through, he wasn't doing too badly with the up and over approach. Satisfied with his hold, he let go with his other hand and used the momentum of his swing to drop onto the nearby outcropping. Exhaling in relief, he dumped his pack to the ground with a smile and laid flat on his back, breathing hard. I don't think we would have made such good time going up if the desert was on the other side of the mountains. This sunlight is hot! Fanning himself with his hand, Stephen sat up and surveyed the landscape below. The desert stretched out for miles to the south, and most of it was blanketed by a fierce sandstorm. But looking north at where they had crossed over the mountains, the sand faded away into rocky foothills. That region of the desert would be the safest place to descend, since where Stephen sat now overlooked sheer cliffside that would be impossible to scale without proper climbing gear. Looking closer at the rust-colored rocks below, some movement caught Stephen's eye. Raising a hand to shield against the bright sunlight, he squinted in an effort to see if the figures he spotted were indeed real, or just the shimmering heat playing tricks on him. As he peered closer, he was sure there definitely was something or someone down there. Several large shapes sat gray and unmoving, while multiple individuals scurried in and around them, wearing some sort of red color that nearly matched the ruddy ground of the foothills. There weren't any visible markings or insignias that he could see, and he wondered who or what the mysterious group could be. As he pondered the possibilities, Stephen became acutely aware that the sweat on his brow hadn't vanished since he had stopped for a breather. The unimpeded desert sun was just too intense at this elevation. It's time to get off this cliff, he muttered as he wiped the perspiration that threatened to roll into his eyes. Fumbling at his belt, he pulled out Matang's Pokeball. Stephen shifted to make some room at the front of the ledge before releasing his partner. Matang materialized with a short cry, and Stephen leaned over his partner to point down at the plateau below. Think you can get me down there? This face is too steep for me to climb down. Matang eyed the cliff in question and nodded. It had carried Stephen on its back across flat ground before. How different could it be to lift its trainer up and down instead? At Matang's confirmation, Stephen regathered his pack and clambered up to kneel atop his partner's head. 2 pats to signal he was ready, and Matang hovered forward until it was to the very lip of the ledge. When Matang paused a moment at the edge, Stephen peered over the side to see what the hesitation was for. Unfortunately, that move left him unprepared for when Matang plummeted off the ledge like a rock. Stephen pitched forward with a startled yell, unbalanced from the weight of his pack. He sprawled onto his stomach while scrabbling for a better grip on his Pokemon's angular hide. Matang rattled a cry at the commotion over its head, clearly flustered that its supposedly controlled descent wasn't controlled enough for its passenger. The feeling of free fall soon vanished as the pair slowed to a cushioned stop with a humming pulse of magnetism. Matang's gaze rolled skyward in an effort to check on the motionless weight still resting on its head. It warbled a questioning note, which prompted a hand to weakly slide into its field of view. "We need to work on vertical travel, please," came Stephen's shaky reply. "Or at least warn me next time." Concern all but gone, Matang grated an annoyed sound and tilted sideways to deposit Stephen unceremoniously onto the ground, where he landed with a grunt. "Hey!" He turned to admonish his Pokemon's sour behavior, but once he saw where Metang's gaze had wandered, he followed where it was looking. They had landed near the cluster of activity Steven had spotted up on the cliff. Now that he could see clearly, it was apparent they happened upon some kind of campsite. The larger, stationary shapes turned out to be a group of tents and machines, and the figures moving around must have been part of the same organization, as they all had on similar-looking red coats. As they wove in and out of the campsite, setting up various pieces of equipment, Steven raised a hand to his chin and thought, "The camp's occupants certainly didn't look like your typical desert explorers." Steven racked his brain to think of who could be setting up camp at the outskirts of the desert. And then he remembered. The meteor that flew overhead the previous night! These men must be here to research the meteor site. While meteor strikes weren't rare in Hoenn, Meteor Falls was practically pockmarked with craters. Any impacts outside of the normal areas were sure to draw scientific interest. Steven's eyes lit up. Even though terrestrial rocks were his primary interest, he recalled the excitement he felt when his father had taken him to visit Hoenn's premier meteorite research center in Falarbur Town. The samples on display were just as interesting as those pulled from deep within the Earth. Now, if only he could recall the researcher's name. Professor Cosmo, that was it! Bolstered by the thought of getting to chat with the professor again, Steven set off towards the camp with Metang in tow. As he drew near, he began to recognize some of the equipment from his visit to the professor's lab. There was no doubt the group was here in search of the meteor site. One of the red-coated individuals looked up from the clipboard he was reading and spotted the approaching trainer. His voice was gruff. "Hey, where did you come from?" Steven blinked at the rude greeting, but he was determined to be polite. These men were working for Professor Cosmo, after all. "I was just passing through on a hike when I noticed your campsite. I didn't mean to intrude." By now, several of the man's colleagues had noticed Steven's presence as well, and they dropped what they were doing and gathered around, looking none too friendly. "Keep on walking, kid. No one here is looking for a battle, so scram!" Steven frowned, although he could guess why these researchers would assume he was simply a trainer looking for a battle. So before he spoke again, he recalled Metang to its Pokeball. "My apologies. I'm not here to battle. I was hoping to speak with Professor Cosmo, actually. Is he here with you?" Two of the men shared a sideways glance, while a third only offered a bewildered shrug. Steven noticed the odd reaction, but held his tongue as he waited for an answer. Finally, someone from the group spoke up. No, he's not here." Steven's hand found its way back to his chin. "Then perhaps I'll see if I can catch up to him when I get to Falarbur. That is, unless he'll be joining you here soon? I'm happy to wait, if it means I could possibly watch the meteor excavation." "What did you say?" "Oh!" One of the men was cut off with an elbow to the ribs, and Steven's eyes narrowed at the scientist's strange behavior. The group huddled close and whispered among themselves with hushed tones before turning to face Steven again, this time with overly friendly smiles. "Sorry, kid. Professor Cosmo won't be joining us here. He asked us to keep the excavation a secret, so we can't let you stick around. We'll let him know you're looking for him, though." The group nodded in finality, red hoods bobbing in unison, before the nearest one stepped forward and neatly guided Steven out of the camp by his shoulders. "Okay, kid, thanks for stopping by." As he was pushed to a halt at the edge of the campsite, he turned to question his sudden exit and discovered the scientist had beaten a hasty retreat back to his companions. They had huddled up once more, and all eyes were on him as he stood with a bewildered expression on his face. Steven frowned at the odd exchange and made a mental note to ask Professor Cosmo about his employees later. Casting one last glance over his shoulder, Steven turned to put the camp behind him, and set off towards Route 113.